Joining us now by the telephone, Representative Mike Kelly, Republican from Pennsylvania. Representative Kelly, welcome back to NRA News Cam Company. How are you, sir?
Al, I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I know if you don't get one cam, you get the other cam, and it's great to be on with you and also with John and with Dayton. It's really good, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Congressman. It's an honor to talk to you on the show. We appreciate it. So there's want to talk, we definitely want to talk about what happened this year on Capitol Hill. But, of course, first we want to talk about, unfortunately, there's very few outlets that even talk about the UN Arms Trade Treaty. And usually if they do, it's a glowing recommendation. Remind our listeners exactly what the UN Arms Trade Treaty would do, wants to do, and why you are so against it, and talk about your amendment.
Well, when we had heard about this early on, and then the president, about halfway through the campaigning in 2012, backed off on it. In July, he backed off. But the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty would severely damage our country's sovereignty over our trade policy, and it would go into effect. You would have some of the worst players in the world sitting at the table, coming up with a policy that, whenever she was Secretary of State, Ms. Clinton said, "We have the golden policy. We have the best policy out there. If the rest of the world wants to look at it, we're the gold standard. We'll be glad to share that with you." Then all of a sudden, these folks decide, you know what? There's a better group out there, the United Nations, and sitting down with people like China and Iraq, and some of these people that you just say, wait, these are not people you want to sit down with to forge our policy, our trade policy. We were going to cede our ability for our own policies and the way that we deal with guns, the way we handle gun treatment, all of these things. Our Second Amendment rights would be on the line. We'd be ceding them over to a group of people around the world that are bad actors, and we'd be doing it through the United Nations. Now, I don't know. I've gotten to the point where anything coming out of the United Nations for me, you better look at it 3 or 4 times. And if it starts off with, say, this is for the general welfare, or this is for the overall good, then you say, you know what, hold on to your Constitution. They're coming after us again. We were willing to cede our sovereignty on the way we do our arms trading to a group of people that I don't think have our best interest in mind. So when we heard about this, and I say we, I'm talking about the staff, I'm not talking about myself in third person, they got on board with it, started searching through it, got with Heritage. We found out what was going on. We were able then, Cam, to come up with an amendment, and it got under the National Defense Authorization Act. Now, Secretary Kerry signed this treaty, by the way, in the summer. It was not ratified by the Senate. So what we did is that, you know what, for the treaty to go through, that would have to come to Congress for implementing legislation that would fund any of the pieces that needed funded to carry out the treaty. Well, first of all, it has to be ratified by the Senate. We were able to put language in there that really puts it impossible for any money to be appropriated to enforce this treaty, and unless it's ratified by the Senate will not ratify it. The funny part about all this, I don't mean funny, humorous, the president just signed that piece of legislation last week. He was the one that fought for this treaty. He sends his Secretary of State to go and lobby for it. They ran it. They did a backdoor deal on it to get it passed because it wouldn't pass on its own, so they did a backdoor deal through the United Nations to get it passed. Secretary Kerry signs it, and now the president just signed last week a piece of legislation that prevents his piece of legislation from going forward, the lack of funding, and it's not going to get ratified by the Senate. But I want to tell you something, Kim. If it's not for the NRA, if it's not for our listeners, this thing goes through under the guise of something that's good for the whole world, bad for America, but good for the world. And our folks listening and paying attention and calling their representatives, both in the House and in the Senate, we've got overwhelming support from everybody for this, so it allows us to stop it in its tracks, at least for the coming year. Now, we'll go back to battle again, because next year we'll be doing the same thing all over again. We've got to stay on top of these things. It's the old story. When did they steal it from me? When you weren't looking. So just keep alert. We'll keep an eye on it. We're never going to go away. And our pledge is to make sure that we keep all the rights that have been enshrined over the years through our Constitution, that we keep those in place for our citizens.
Speaking with Representative Mike Kelly, Republican from Pennsylvania. Representative Kelly, this is John Poppin, and I want to tell you,
hey, John.
we've been following this here, at least I personally here at NRA News, since 2001, I think it was.
And especially with Ginny's reports.
And Ginny's been up there, and I'll tell you what, I appreciated your history of this because that's what people need to realize. This stuff is just insidious. It doesn't go away. The UN is very patient and very crafty in the way they do this stuff. It's been sitting around forever, and if it doesn't get past this time, they just don't go away. And this hasn't gone away. And you're right. You can't just go, well, you know, hey. And if you look at the difference, one thing I wanted to really highlight was the difference between the earlier administration and this one in the whole attitude, like when we had John Bolton up there as the ambassador versus now. Amen. And this is why it's even so much more dangerous now, because this is our sovereignty is not a big deal to the folks in this administration, and I think we're in a much more dangerous position. It's hard for people to kind of get their hands around this. It's different than like a local anti-gun ordinance, but this is very dangerous stuff.
Yeah, you're right. You know, and Ambassador Bolton actually sat down with our staff in our office and helped us with this to forge it and bring it forward. And you know what? It's the old story. If you don't stay informed, if you don't stay on top of it, and this is not, I'm not, you know, making any disrespectful comments, but we all get so busy making sure that we're taking care of our families and being able to put food on the table and clothes on the backs of our kids and get them educated, that a lot of these things go through the middle of the night. Now, they call this treaty, this type of treaty, a zombie treaty, and I mean, it's not alive, but it's kind of wandering around out there. So it's able to feed on something else that will give it life. And one of the things that we've got to do as elected representatives of the people is we have got to watch this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And especially with this administration, I've never seen a group that it is more murky and does things that you look and say, gosh, these people, it's so hard to keep up with them. It's only hard to keep up with them if you don't know what they are. It's the old story. You know where I'm from in western Pennsylvania. If it waddles like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. These folks, you got to watch them all the time because, listen, they'll take just about anything from you that they can, and they'll say, well, you should have been paying attention. See, we talked about it for a while. No, they don't. No, they don't. This is supposed to be the most clear and transparent administration ever.
Right.
Have you ever seen anything in your life in the last 5 years that has driven the gap between what the American people have belief and trust in than the way this government has separated itself from the everyday American citizen?
Yes, it's the opaque administration.
Yes.
This is Seton Motley. Hello, Congressman. As far as this bill is concerned, you know, the joke about immigration was, if you don't like the electorate, import a new one. And it seems to me that with people like the president and John Kerry and the Democrats, if you don't like, if we can't get the government we want, we'll go to the UN and have them be our government. And it seems like they're importing a government that's more amenable to gun control and all those sorts of things that they can't get done via the legislative process domestically.
No, right. And again, and I just please for our listeners, anytime you see the overall good, the general welfare, the best we can do for mankind, look out, because these folks, whatever it is that they're saying, and it sounds real nice and warm and fuzzy, keep in mind it's just the opposite of what it means for Americans and our exceptional country that we have. They will take almost any freedom, any liberty. Their idea is like big government isn't enough. It has to get bigger all the time. It has to be more intrusive. It has to take away more of your personal freedoms and liberty. They believe that. They believe government is the answer to every question. And I from just job as I believe government is the answer to every problem. These folks continually go way over the top of what this country was ever supposed to be. And I know we all believe it in our hearts. We know what we have to do. We know that it's up to us to stay on guard and make sure that we keep this country as exceptional as it is, but it requires always being on your guard, never, ever putting your head in the pillow at night and say, you know what, I think that these guys are going to be all right. As long as they're in office, as long as they're driving the agenda, it is a dangerous time for all America.
All right, Congressman. So we will definitely, we'll follow you. We will continue to have you on for this topic because, of course, here in NRA News, it's a very big, important story for us, the UN Arms Trade Treaty. And like I said, Ginny Simone, our special correspondent, has been up there all the time. We cover the story like no other, and it's good to have you on for that. That being said, if we can move on to some a couple other topics real quick.
Sure,
we have, of course, it being the end of the year. We've been doing some year-end lists, some good, some bad, talking about what happened in the past year. When you think of, I know your background is in the auto industry, and you know that probably more than most there on Capitol Hill. When you look at what happened this year with GM and the American taxpayer losing $10 million, as I said, $10 billion. Sorry if I didn't say it correctly or clearly enough. the taxpayers lose $10 billion on this. The CEO of GM doesn't think that
Don't
it
worry,
should be.
the United Auto Workers Union found it.
it should be paid back. When you look at that story alone, let's start with that. What do you think of this? That's just that story in itself.
Well, you know what? I'm an automobile dealer. I'm actually a Chevrolet, Cadillac, and a Hyundai Kia dealer. My dad started our business back in 1953 after being a parts picker in a General Motors warehouse and then going to the Warren and coming back home and starting a little one-car showroom store and then building it into something we're very proud of. Yeah. My son runs it now. We're third generation. But when you look at General Motors and you look at the position that General Motors was in, so they come up with this bailout, which I never quite understood. People would talk about how it would affect me as a dealer. I said, well, all I know is somebody else, Jim goes into bankruptcy, somebody would buy it out, somebody would take over. That market's not going to go away. Now, you got to be careful how you talk about these things. People say, well, they could have ruined Detroit. Well, how did it save Detroit? I mean, I'm looking at Detroit now. It's kind of ruined.
Yeah.
Actually, they talk about how many jobs were saved. No, you know what, fellas, I got to tell you. The investment that the American tax, we did not get a good return on that. Now, the spin will be on it that we kept all these people in work and we didn't lose it. Reality of it is, at the end of the day, it was not a good investment for the taxpayers when you look at the full scope. It wasn't a good deal for General Motors, kept them alive. The other part of it is General Motors then turned over its operation to this administration, and a lot of the decisions that have been made since that day really drove General Motors in an altogether different direction. We used to be the leader in hydrogen car development, truck development. We don't do that anymore. We're out of the medium-duty and heavy-duty truck business at the Chevrolet end of it. Again, government coming in, picking and choosing, winners and losers, government coming in, not knowing their backside from some other part of their body, making decisions on how that business should be run. Anytime the government gets involved, the one thing you know for sure is they're going to overspend and they're going to underperform. I think General Motors, looking back on it, now they've had some good leadership. Ackerson has done a good job to get them where they are today, but still a loser overall when you look at the investment for the American taxpayer. Did it save General Motors? I don't know that it saved General Motors. I don't know of anybody that goes of that scope, goes into bankruptcy and emerges 11 days later. I don't know that you can do that as an individual with a little tiny business. This is a huge business, 11-day turnaround, and all of a sudden they emerge from bankruptcy. You know who got hurt in this. All the salaried people got killed. The UAW got taken care of. You look at it and say, this is, again, an example of crony capitalism, picking and choosing winners and losers, picking and choosing who gets the benefit, who gets the loss. And you sit back and look at it and say, this again, keep the government out of your business. And I think General Motors, on the hindsight, they probably wish that they had done things a little bit different. They're back on their feet right now, but it's a very competitive industry, as you know. We have to have manufacturing in this country. There's no question about that. I just think in this case, again, government intervention really hurt them. But they're coming back now. They're making the way back. I'm glad that the taxpayers are no longer, they got some money back up. They're never going to get their full return. Mm-hmm. Hopefully the residual value over a long period of time will look well. But for General Motors, it was very important for them to get away from the government, too. I think that was a drag on a lot of the things they were doing. I know people would come in the showroom and say, you know what, probably not going to buy a GM car now because it's government motors. I think I'll look at a Ford because they didn't take the bailout. So I think it had, it was a good deal, bad deal for GM. Overall, I'm glad it's done. I feel bad that the taxpayers took a big hit on it. But again, fellas, these things are always, hindsight's always 20/20. I think they did what they thought they had to do at the time, but they got in bed with the wrong partner.
Well, I'll tell you what, the UAW is going to be electing Democrats for years based on the money they got out of the bailout. Second of all, I don't know if you know this, Congressman, but no company on the planet had more green energy patents in 2010 than General Motors.
Right. Now, listen, they followed the Judas code. Fellas, we know how that worked. They put a carrot out there. The whole business. Look at the new cafe.
Yes.
These companies all jumped on board. They offered these guys this developmental money.
Congressman, can you explain?
Go along with the new standard.
Congressman,
can you explain the cafe real quick for people who don't know what that is?
Yes.
Oh, okay. The corporate average fuel economy. And now what the manufacturers are saying is they're going to get to this 50 miles per gallon.
They doubled it, right? They basically doubled it.
And it can't be done. And there's all kind of sidebars in that. But you know why they did it, guys? They did it for the 30 pieces of silver. They thought that somehow they were going to get free money. Now, it's not free money. This comes out of taxpayers' pockets, for crying out loud. I'm so sick of hearing it. Anytime it comes from the government, it doesn't come from the government. It comes from the government taking it out, pulling the taxpayers up by their ankles and shaking every dime and penny out of their pocket, and then put it where they want to put it. So they went after that carrot We've gotten rid of this green energy thing. It's an old story. If something's market ready, it's market ready. If it's not, then don't subsidize it, because no matter what kind of money, look at the Chevy Volt, for crying out loud, $7,500 tax credit from the feds. In Pennsylvania, they give it another $3,500. That's $11,000.
Oh my God!
To sell a car that nobody can afford. Oh, and if it's about gas mileage, hell, we get cars that are getting great gas mileage right now. They're not electric. They don't have to be hybrids. They're doing much better than they used to. So a little bit of this goes a long way with me. I'm so fed up of being fed this formula these folks have that have never. I mean, really. They'd have trouble pouring pee out of a boot if the instructions were on the bottom of the heel. But they're going to tell people how to build cars, how to invest their money, everything else. I mean, you get to the point, say, get the H away from me. I know how to do this. Get away.
You know, I always find it interesting that the congressmen that have the more experience they have in any particular industry, the less they want the government involved. It's an amazing correlative effect.
Yeah, well, don't you get a kick out of this? An outfit that's running $17 trillion in the red is going to come in and tell you how to run your business. I mean, it's like, oh, my God, nobody hires these guys as business consultants.
All right, Congressman, last question before we let you go. We know you're a busy man. It being the end of 2013, when you look at polls of the body in which you sit, let's be honest, they suck. Congressional approval is at an all-time low. People look at Congress and just don't have very, very few good thoughts about it.
Yeah.
You personally, you can't speak for everyone up there on Capitol Hill, but you personally, Representative Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania, what did you do to help that approval number, and what did you do personally to hurt that approval number? Everyone wants accountability, so be accountable to the voters. What did you do, good and bad, in Capitol Hill?
Well, one of the things that we just talked about, UNATT, we worked very hard in that, and that was a terrific thing to get done in the face of our Second Amendment. The other thing we worked on some local things, there's a little item called the Asian carp that are coming up through the Ohio Valley River basin. These are an invasive species that will wipe out about a $7 billion fishing business in the Great Lakes. And people, you should go on Google it, find out Asian carp, and you'll see what I'm talking about. The other thing we've been able to do, for me personally, I think that the Republicans, while we're in the minority, we do hold a slight majority in the House. We're in the minority overall. We've been able to put some things forward. We can get through the House, guys, but we can't get through the Senate because Mr. Reid refuses to look at them. I think the Republicans have been able to hold the line on some things, don't have enough strength to get it completely reconfigured. For me personally, I think being there every day, making sure that we're safeguarding our constitutional rights, making sure that we're staying alert on everything that affects the people that we represent, and trying to represent them the right way. That's something that we work on all the time. We have 15 people to serve the needs of 705,687 folks in our district. So that's a little out of balance of what we can do. We help people an awful lot with their Social Security problems, now health care problems. We as Republicans have the American Health Care Reform Act that we're trying to get implemented that would actually really bring some meaningful reform to health care, drive the cost down, drive the availability up. We're trying to do that to save health care in this country. It's never been about the quality of health care. It's just been about access to insurance, and these folks have so badly botched it and driven it off the charts as far as what's going to cost people. Those things we've been able to work for. As far as what we've done poorly, we're not playing as well together as we could as a team. And
do you take
responsibility
has been to
build
for
relationships.
Do you take responsibility for some of that yourself, sir?
Well, I think that all of us, all 435 of us, better realize one thing. Yeah. If you're there representing your best interests, go home. Go home. This is not a career. This is a service.
Go home and sell some cars.
Yeah, well, listen, I'll tell you what. But as I tell my friends all the time, they say, well, if you don't do these things certain way, you won't get reelected. I said, boy, what a horrible penalty. I'd have to go home and sleep with my wife, go to my mass in the morning and have breakfast with my friends and go out to the shop and see the mechanics and all the guys that make it possible for us to meet payroll every 2 weeks, 110 people we pay. I enjoy the town that I live in, but I also think that this is a call to arms for people of our generation. My dad and mom went through the Great Depression and the war. That was not optional for them. Right now, where we're at, I know the public opinion is very low on Congress, but the other answer to that is, honestly, folks, where else would we go? If we don't get this fixed, where else will we go? And this is not an option, by the way, not for any of us. As I said earlier, if you're there to make a career out of it, you got your eyes on the wrong prize. Go there, serve the way most of our people did. You talk about the 99% and the 1%. That 1% of our guys and gals in uniform that protect the other 99%. Congress And elected officials should have that same type of devotion to say, you know what, we're here to protect the rights of those who sent us to represent them. So that's what I've tried to do. On the other end of it, the only thing I feel bad about is that we haven't been able to get some of these other things across the line. We haven't been able to get more spending cuts that we need to do. We haven't been able to get more reformation on regulations. We got to get the regulations dialed back where they're sensible, and we've got to get this tax under control. We are bleeding the constituency to death. We just can't continue to do this. And the trajectory of the spending in our debt will make us a third world country. And what's always made us strong in the past, we have great values, but you know what? You got it. Sometimes your heart's willing, but your wallet's weak. You know, we have a lot of things we have to get done. So until we get the economy back on its feet, this dynamic and robust economy, we can't do a lot of the things that need to be done. So I'm not disappointed. I just wish there were more hours in the day to get more done for the people I represent.
Well, we appreciate honesty, Congressman. You've always been a straight shooter with us, and we thank you for all your time this year, and thank you for such an open and honest answer there.
All right, Representative Mike Kelly, Republican from Pennsylvania. Have a happy New Year, sir. And
hey,
please,
thank you. Happy New Year to all of you and all our listeners. But listen, I sincerely mean, thank you for what you're doing. It's getting that message out there that's so critical. It's what we don't know that's going to hurt us.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate
Thanks, guys.
it.